Hi, everybody. I have a chart here for you that I just wanted to teach through so you can see some aspects that jump out. This is, of course, with regards to what is going on in the last few weeks around Sam Bankman Fried. I'm going to call him SBF just for ease. This is with regards also to his company, FTX, which is a cryptocurrency exchange that ran into massive financial troubles, obviously, or I have to say, allegedly, due to fraud. And I want to show you a few of the red flags that already are there in the natal chart, and then we'll see how the transits affects this chart, and we can see what that shows up in an individual's experience. This is what I'm calling the Saturn return from hell. Sam has had his Saturn return only recently at the beginning of this year, the end of last year, and meaning 2022 and late 2021. And so he's done it, he's through it. But what Saturn returns do is always show you the fruits of the previous choices that you've made. Saturn will always give you the, I'm going to say karma. I will explain that word in another video because I know that so many people consider that punishment. It's not about punishment, it's the results, the fruits of the actions that you've done in the past, and all the consequences that you're living through that are not necessarily also dependent on what you have chosen. So we are seeing the fruits of his karma. And I'm going to show you, going back over the last 5 years, how that has panned out for him and what brought him to this point. So let's start with the natal chart and then we'll look at the transits. Right off the bat, we see that he is a Pisces sun. I don't have a time for this chart, so I'm doing what's called a solar chart. A solar chart tells us a lot about the individual. Unfortunately, it doesn't show us the actual locations of the different planets. It's possible that he's a Pisces rising, but we don't know that. If anyone has a birth time for him, I would love to know. You can put it in the comments. What a solar chart will show us is the effects of the person and their choices and how they go through life. So there's an enormous amount that we can get from a solar chart. I sometimes do natal readings based entirely on the solar chart, and then again based on the lunar chart to help support a person psychologically when a person doesn't know their birth time. So obviously it's much better when we have a very reliable birth time. In this case, we're giving it a solar chart with his 16-degree Pisces sun. Some people say, well, Pisces is already quite sort of flighty and a little bit ungrounded, and that can absolutely be true. In his case, it's definitely true, and I'll show you why, because we can't say that about every single Pisces. It's not how that works. It's one of the archetypes of the chart. It's not the whole story. So you must never judge a person based on one aspect of the chart. It has to be recalled in different areas of the chart. And again, I'm just really sorry that I don't have a timed chart, so I could be really much more targeted and specific. I could be much more confident in a lot of the things that I would want to say. Otherwise, I'm just going to show you the things that are accurate based on a solar chart. We are looking for the ruler of Pisces now. So I use, of course, the traditional rulers, and then we back that up with the secondary rulers, which are the outer planets. So we have the ruler in detriment in the seventh house. So we see Jupiter across from this sun. It's a very wide opposition. That's why it's not showing up on the chart as an opposition. It's an 8-degree opposition, a little bit less than 8 degrees. In a natal chart, that still counts. It's still something significant and definitely something you want to include in your assessment of the individual. We have this opposition again in detriment. So the ruler of the sun is not functioning as well as it could. Jupiter in the seventh house shows somebody also who's very preoccupied by relationships, dealings with other people in general. It is in retrograde, and again, so not giving us the results that we want on top of being in detriment. We have to already keep that in mind. So this is a Jupiter that's not fulfilling its full promise in the chart. And then we want to see what else is going on in terms of other aspects to this sun. So there is that opposition to Jupiter, but there's also a really, and sorry, there I should be annotating as I'm going. So there's the Jupiter. We also see a really tight sextile between the Uranus and Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, which that's a thing that many of you will have if you're born in the early 90s. That's a generational aspect that's called. It's not unique to Sam. but that's in very tight sextile to the sun. So that says something very powerfully about what's going on with this sun. Let's say, okay, what is making up this person? What is part of this person's experience? And we look particularly here because Neptune is the modern ruler. And it's just 2 degrees shy of this sextile of exact, and then Uranus is 1 degree off. So we see somebody who has a very innovative and creative approach to life. This is Uranus in the 11th house, where it's very strong, and in Capricorn, showing something to do with the establishment. So showing something to do with wanting to change how things are done. Uranus in Capricorn is about adjusting, making something different in the establishment. And if you want to look at that in general terms, that conjunction between Uranus and Neptune was the beginning of this whole long process that we're experiencing right now, which is very much about breaking down how things were done before. The old business class, the old political class, and so on, all started to disintegrate in the early 90s. And we're seeing the results of that still today. So we're seeing that very, very personally in Sam's chart because it affects his sun. And because that's partly one of the rulers of the sun, we want to keep that uppermost in mind. So when Neptune is affecting the sun, we see somebody who is subject to potential delusions, fantasies, romantic thinking at the very best, somebody who's quite creative, very inspired. That same thing with this Uranus sextile as well, very inspiring. This is in the house of civil society. It's about groups and associations. It's about our collective experience. And Sam has turned his sort of charity and his concern for society into a performative art. And he spoke about that quite a lot. It was one of his sort of signature looks. And he very blatantly told on at least a couple of occasions, some interviewers, that he was doing that because that's how our society works. So people want to see a particular way of being. And so that was already, we get this feeling, this is somebody who is very well aware. He is crafting his look. And he, in fact, he worked for an organization just before establishing these companies. He worked for an organization that was all about social justice. I'll link to that bio insofar as it's a bio from Wikipedia. I'm picking up a lot of what I'm saying, by the way, from interviews that he's done recently. I'm not a crypto person. I honestly have advised against it whenever anybody asks my opinion, not that you might care. I'm not interested in crypto, but what I am interested in as a person who works therapeutically with people is body language and the way people speak, the way they present themselves, the way that they talk about things, which relays back quite a lot of information about who they actually are. And of course, we have quite a few years of interviews with him, quite prominent interviews, which show us who he is or who he wants us to see him as. And that's the important aspect of this Neptune here in aspect to the sun. It's about being something that you think people want to see in you. We see that again coming back through this Jupiter in the 7th, which is about people pleasing. Jupiter in the 7th is actually wonderful for relationships, partly because you're so motivated by relationships that you will want to you kind of judge yourself based on what other people think of you, and you put relationships very much in the center of your self-esteem. And because this Jupiter is in detriment, and for many other factors that we'll see, and we see that this person is not confident. There's an enormous problem of lack of confidence in his chart that we see also in connection to his parents. Those things line up, and that's one of the reasons I would say it. If there was only one thing jumping out, I'd say, yeah, let's leave that, not really important. We certainly see that this is one of his missions in life, this idea of serving in society, wanting to be seen. The 11th house is where we are visible for the thing that we do. 10th house is the thing that we do. The 11th house is the product of that. It's what we get from that, and it's part of getting accolades and getting recognition. So social recognition in this case, and because it's in Capricorn, we see that there's a lot of ambition involved. So ambition is one of the keywords for Capricorn. We see that very, very powerfully here, and we see that Capricorn energy feeds back into the sun, which is who am I and what do I do. So again, this is a solar chart. So when I'm saying 11th house, 12th house, and so on, you have to see that from the sun. It's the 11th from the sun, 12th from the sun, and so on. So we can't be sure that this is actually the placement of the planets in his natal chart if we knew where the ascendant was. Right, coming back to that issue of self-esteem. So we have, again, anytime you see that Neptune is in aspect to the sun, we also want to ask that question. Does this person have self-confidence? You have to see that a few different ways. It's not enough to see just Neptune and the sun, but of course here it's reinforcing so much of that aspect of lacking self-confidence. And then we also see that Sam has three planets conjunct, so a very tight conjunction within only 7 arc minutes of a degree between Mars and Saturn, a very strong Saturn as it rules Aquarius, and Venus, which is further away. Venus is 7 degrees away, but that's still very much a conjunction, as we saw with the opposition in a natal chart. You want to go up to 10 degrees to see an aspect, depending on the planets, for the most important planets for sure. And I give tighter orbs if it's the outer planets, and I also give a broader orb if it's a conjunction. We're seeing a relatively powerful conjunction, triple conjunction in Aquarius. So again, that's somebody socially minded, somebody who's very avant-garde. They want to move forward in life. They want things to change, and we've seen that because of that revolutionary quality of Uranus in Capricorn already with this conjunction to Neptune. However, when we see 12th house animated so much, the ruler of the 8th house, Venus, so we have Libra ruling the 8th, Venus rules that house. Venus also rules the 3rd in this chart. Money, commerce, exchanges of all kinds, communications of all kinds. Keep that word in mind, communications, how a person talks to people, how a person speaks about things. And Venus is ruling the 3rd. Venus is ruling the 8th, other people's money, secrets, crises, hidden things. Everything in the 8th house, the 12th house is also very hidden, things that we're usually not showing the public. And when we see Venus there with a really challenging conjunction, this Mars and Saturn, very, very strong. In when I would see something that provides a real capacity for goodness in a person, I would say this is a very powerful person. They can really be dynamic. They can really be, they can change the world. And of course, he has done, but we would want to see positive support for that to be a positive effect. And then we want to see also that the 12th house represents ancestors, so the lineage of the family. It's one of the places that we look when we look to see what came before this person, what was there that this person is sort of tapping into in terms of the family. Well, there we see some difficulty. We see that Saturn conjunct Mars can be with regards to violence. This is about issues around authority. That's a very dynamic energy. Now, again, I'm not making allegations. I don't know the story. So these things might come out at some future point. But at somewhere along the line, the family has had issues around violence, issues around, real challenges in terms of the family history. We see that. And that is connected with foreign lands as well. We see that through the 12th house, connected to abroad, foreigners and everything to do with abroad. Now, when we see such a challenging conjunction, and then we see Venus is involved in that, and then Venus is involved in these houses that have to do with business and other people's money. Venus in the 12th house, as a rule, it's worth looking for things that are not open, like this is about illicit relationships or hidden relationships. And that doesn't necessarily have to be illicit. It can be that you have hidden relationships for reasons of simple discretion. Like you know a famous person, for example, but you can't tell the world that you know this famous person because it would actually antagonize this famous person. It would cause trouble in their life. So you just keep the relationship quiet. That one way that could look. There's nothing nefarious about that. But when we see Mars and Saturn so close, and we see them in such a tight conjunction, they operate as one, then we're looking at something a little different. Now we're looking at a Venus which is more deceptive. This is about illicit dealings. This is about things that are not being shown to the public. And we see, again, just as a reminder, Venus is is controlling everything to do with that third house of communications, how a person speaks, how a person runs business, how a person does exchanges, and the eighth house of other people's money, and the product of relationships, whatever comes from relationships. So this is very much to do with investments and so on. And so we are seeing this very, very clear indication that there's something going on behind the scenes in this person's life. Now, again, we don't know yet how that operates. We have to keep investigating. We have to keep looking at other clues. So here's another clue that we get very strongly, which is that this sun in Pisces at 16 degrees is also trining Pluto retrograde in Scorpio. So Pluto's in the ninth house all by itself. It is in aspect to the sun by trine, but it's again 6 degrees off for a slow moving planet. Again, that I would want a really tight orb. So 6 degrees is for me tight enough, but I wouldn't be super bothered if it were like 10 degrees or more. And then we see this Pluto in really tight orb with Venus, 2 degrees off of a square. Pluto square Venus is something difficult. That is somebody who has, at the very least, challenges in relationships in general. This again is about money. So Pluto Venus aspects are about money and power and desire for that, because that's a very strong sign of ambition. So when we have that Pluto Venus aspect, it's very ambitious energy, a person who is really willing to do something powerful, be creative, be powerful to gain wealth. So we see that Pluto squaring Venus is also quite compulsive. It's controlling behavior. It gives a person a poor self-image. So it's another reference here to this lack of self-esteem. It gives a person a lack of confidence in terms of their personal image or their sense of self or their sense of self in relationship, and potentially, in case of the reference to Venus as representing money, a poor image in terms of money, in the sense of maybe the person feels inadequate, and it's just not enough. And that's the thing with Pluto. It's about always needing more. It's about where the fear is, where the obsession is. In this case, it's all based in Venus. So Pluto is obsessed with Venus. That can produce controlling behavior, manipulative behavior as well. And we want to keep that word manipulation uppermost as well, because this is part of the aspect of Neptune and Sun. Because Neptune especially is ruling this sun. I wouldn't necessarily say that about any Neptune Sun aspect, although it's definitely worth keeping that in mind. But certainly because Neptune has such a powerful relationship to this sun, manipulation is a really important word in this chart. So here we have the Pluto, which is also sextile this very same Neptune. And so that's 4 degrees off, 4.5 degrees off. And again, another clue to this manipulation, another clue to this relationship of something a little bit untoward. And so again, if we turn this to the highest level, we say, okay, well, this person could also be truly wonderful, spiritual, and so on. That would be ideally the best outcome for this kind of chart, is that a person turns all of this energy towards spirit. They turn all of this energy towards their desire to evolve and wake up in this lifetime. We're not seeing evidence of that in his life. We see that superficially. And then I remind you that he did say that that type of pandering with regards to social justice and these causes was an important thing to American opinion. So he said, I have to be like this because people like that. They expect that. So he's very manipulative in that sense. And we're seeing that in spades in his chart. When we see Pluto way up there in the ninth house, again, it is aspected, but it's still isolated in the ninth house in retrograde in Scorpio and ruled by this Mars, which is in a tight conjunction with Saturn. We're seeing daddy issues. So the ninth house is about the father. We're seeing definitely issues with authority and the father. This Pluto is even, it's certainly in aspect with Venus, and it's even, I would consider, in aspect with the Mars Saturn conjunction. Again, it would be almost 10 degrees, 9.5 degrees of square. But again, for me, it has to be under 10 degrees for any kind of slower moving planet. And in this case, because it's recalling the theme, I'm definitely paying attention to that. So it's not a major theme, it's a minor theme in his chart. but it backs up everything else. But I think this is a very important part of the story. So something going on in terms of his relationship with the father that is not above board. And we see anyway, when we see Saturn in the 12th house and a lot of 12th house aspects, we see what we could call a father who's absent. So with a Pisces sun, that's also where we see the father. Pisces sun would be a father who again is unreliable or absent. There can be addictions as well. And again, I'm not making any judgments on his father. I know nothing about the parents except that they're successful lawyers and I think authors, and somehow they're connected to Stanford University. I can't remember if they're professors, but in any event, they're successful people. The father was, at the very least, absent, if not somehow suffering from some kind of addiction, because there again we have that harkening back to this very important aspect with the ruler of this sun, the modern ruler of this sun, and the opposition with the traditional ruler of this sun. Right, and now we'll come to the mother. This is also significant in terms of this individual's life, that the mother is seen in the moon. The moon, of course, is emotions. It's the mind. It's the aspect of the person that is underneath all of the facade of the person. It's a very strong driver in a person's life. When a person walks into a room, we feel them by the moon. And he's got a very powerful moon in Aries. That's not necessarily that the moon is happy in Aries. It's that it's powerful because it projects itself very, very powerfully. So an aspect of Sam that is very evident is his strong assertive quality, and that's a moon in Aries. A conjunct, again, a 6-degree conjunction with less than 6 degrees even with Mercury. A moon Mercury conjunction is somebody who speaks with passion and emotion. So their emotions are very much in the way that they communicate. They are triggered by their emotions as well in terms of their speech and communication. We see this in the money house, the second house, and the house of value. So again, moon in Aries is ruled by Mars. Where's that Mars? It's conjunct Saturn. And in fact, it is also in a sextile aspect. So very important connection in a natal chart. This connection between Saturn and moon with Mars shows a quick temper, at least with the mother as well, quick temper. There is a Saturn aspect to the moon generally shows conflict, some kind of tension, and especially when Mars is right there, we would say, yeah, for sure, there's been some kind of challenge with the mother. The mother, at the very least, is very independent, very self-aware, self-centered, potentially selfish, and that means that often a person with an Aries moon finds it difficult to relate to people emotionally. They see everything through their own feelings. They see everything through their own desires and wants rather than having a capacity for empathy. So this is something that is very challenging for Aries moon to empathize. It tends to come as an afterthought rather than as an initial response, because their initial response is to think of what works for them. And again, of course, I'm putting nuance here because we know who we're dealing with, right? So I'm showing you how this is showing up in his chart. And Aries moon is also somebody who is super enthusiastic and inspiring and very, can be very funny and fun to be with. And that Mercury in Aries is also extremely impulsive, very witty as well, somebody who speaks off the cuff. Now, we've seen that Sam has implicated himself in so many ways in interviews against the advice of his own lawyers, apparently, or either that or he's just ditched his lawyers and very foolishly speaking in ways that have implicated him in a few interviews. So it's not making him look good. And so here we also have a trine to Chiron. Chiron being, again, a feature of the chart is something I always look to childhood, for example. We see Chiron here in retrograde. That's not uncommon. These are outer planets that are frequently in retrograde. Same thing with the Pluto, same with Jupiter to a certain extent, which is retrograde like 4 months of the year. Chiron is retrograde, I think, 5 months of the year, just like Pluto. So it's not unusual. It's just telling us an extra bit of information. So when we have Chiron in trine to Mercury, we see somebody who has challenges in terms of expressing themselves, perhaps through childhood itself, There again is an emphasis on self-esteem. So when we see Chiron aspecting a planet so tightly in a birth chart, we want to look for issues of self-esteem. We see that for sure with Mercury. How do I express myself? Am I clever enough? Am I good enough? Apparently, he was very good at mathematics. So that's again second house. It's all to do with money, accounting, numbers, etc. Part of his degree was in mathematics, I think, and physics or something like that. So that Chiron there can be a source of a impetus to do better. That is coming from a feeling of lacking self-esteem. Chiron in Leo is definitely a lack of self-esteem on its own. So, again, it's about, can I show up? How can I show up? So, okay, let's say that that's enough about Sam. I just wanted to summarize that there is this issue around him. Is he a liar? Is he a fantasist? Is he being honest? Was he just stupid? And the truth is, there's no way that he was stupid. We do have quite a lot of indicators of strong intelligence. So, was he stupid? That would be hard to argue because, just aside from his credentials, studying at MIT and so on, and I know that many wealthy families just donate money to these universities and get their kids in, or they pull strings and get their kids in. So, not all rich kids are clever, although I do suspect he is, with the moon and Mercury together. That's often a very good mind. We do see with a moon and Mercury is a person who's got a very quick mind, quick thinking, access to creative thought, especially. So, how you use that is the question. And I think that he definitely does have a strong mind. He's no idiot, although he's trying to play the idiot right now to get himself out of these charges, which now somehow run up to something like 600 years worth of charges. And then the question of, is he a liar? Is he a fantasist? Well, I think I've shown that in a number of different ways. So yes, we have aspects that say, at the very least, he does a lot behind the scenes that is a bit questionable, because that Saturn-Mars with the Venus suggests that that's something's untoward, something that is, Saturn-Mars alone. It's a very challenging aspect. It is an aspect of, again, ambition. So I was again referencing that Pluto, the Pluto again being in square to that. It's a very strong ambition, and also connivance, especially when we see that in the 12th house. Then all of this aspecting what I was saying earlier about the Neptune in aspect to the Sun. And Neptune is also in a semi-sextile to Venus. A semi-sextile is a very interesting aspect and often very, very powerful. It shouldn't be overlooked. It's considered sort of a minor aspect, but definitely should be considered a semi-sextile to Venus. So again, love and money from Neptune. Best case scenario, he's a sort of romantic. Worst case scenario, he's just a liar. So I think we're seeing quite a lot of aspects around all of these things adding up to, yeah, he I don't even think he realizes himself that he's lying. I do actually have a certain amount of sympathy for him, because I do think he's also deceiving himself. It's not that he's necessarily only lying, although he's also clearly aware that he's lying, because there's many texts that have surfaced that show he's aware that he's lying, including being part of a chat group on Telegram, an encrypted chat group with a few of his colleagues the chat group was called Wire Fraud. So I think he knew what he was doing from beginning to end. Let's have a look at the transits starting around the time that he started his company called Alameda. That I only have a date of 2017. I don't know exactly when that was. So I'm just going with April 2017. And I just want to show you how Pluto has been challenging and going back and forth over that part of his chart at the time. So Pluto, all the way through 2017, was going over this point of the conjunction between Uranus and Neptune. So emphasizing everything I said earlier about the Uranus and Neptune. At the same time, Pluto was in a sextile with Pluto in the chart. So adding to that, emphasizing everything that Pluto stands for in the chart. Pluto's sextile is about seizing opportunities. It's about desiring change and doing something about it. And now here we have that the mystery and the spontaneousness and the sort of inventiveness of this aspect of Pluto and Uranus together in the chart. We also see that all the way through 2017, we had Saturn moving through his 10th house. And then we have Saturn on the North Node in the beginning of 2018. In 2018, things started to go a little bit pear-shaped. So not that they may have already been before, but certainly by 2018, things were going very, very bad for Alameda. The initial partners that established Alameda with him back in 2017, I don't have the date for that, quit en masse by April. So let's assume that something was already going on in the weeks and months before, because why did they quit? They quit due to concerns over risk management and ethics concerns, business ethics concerns. And that's all the original partners, or many of the original partners that he worked with to establish this company. That's Saturn on the North Node, something very karmic based on the actions that you've taken before being what you did in the 10th house. And then Jupiter hitting that Pluto by transit is going to expose everything that Pluto was doing and then sextiling the Pluto by transit. So this is how the astrology transits start to show up what's going on in a person's life when things come to a head, let's say. And the other aspect of this is that at that time, Neptune was going over his natal sun and was approaching a sextile to his natal Neptune and Uranus transit. So keep that in mind, because that's a part of the feature of these years of 2017, 18, and 19 for him, the very years that he established his business. So Neptune going through the first house in his chart, that would be since 2011, Neptune going through the first house, solar first house, remember, because we don't have the time, we don't have the ascendant, and then eventually, of course, opposing the seventh house, Jupiter. So Chiron had also gone through this first house and was there until the spring of 2018. We'll see shortly how that pans out with his moon. So I'm just going to keep going forward in time. Throughout 2018, he has a really rough time. That's when the colleagues left. We have Mars there at the same time. Now Mars is on, this is, by the way, the 11th house, 11th solar house, representing friends, associates, and people that you share ideals with. So Mars-Saturn, remember that conjunction is tight. It's hard. Mars-Saturn conjunction, this Mars-Saturn-Pluto was harassing us for the beginning of COVID as well. That's what was all about the late winter of 2020, was this Mars, Saturn, Pluto, and then Jupiter was in the mix as well. So we'll see that shortly. So let's just keep that in mind, that Mars and Saturn were really starting to aggravate things for him in the spring. We have then the exact conjunction. So there is a delusion, self-delusion, or him deluding others. That is another aspect of this. And then we have the Mars return. So Mars is always going back every 2 years, goes back. In his case, this was when Mars was going retrograde in Aquarius, and so he would have had that in spades in that period of time. I keep going forward now till April of 2019. I don't have an exact date. I just know April of 2019 was when he established his company, FTX, which is the one that has been declared bankrupt now in November, which is causing up to $8 billion of losses for people, mostly young people, unfortunately. Many people who have lost an enormous amount of their money. So here we have, again, Saturn is in this area, again, of the Uranus and Neptune conjunction. Saturn showing us something, restructuring, showing us something about what this structure is all about. It's not really great to have Saturn Neptune aspects. If you are starting a business, you would want to keep that in mind. Saturn aspecting your natal Neptune. Are you really seeing things clearly? Are you showing things clearly? This is a really significant question when Saturn is coming around that area of business. That also happened to be the time when the South Node was moving through that part of the chart, and so that would create an enormous amount of change in that area, and that would be since the November of 2018 and all the way through to the beginning of 2020 once again. And then, of course, Pluto lurking in sextile to his natal Pluto, and that's been ongoing for a very long time. That's been ongoing through all of this phase: 2018, 2019, 2020, and even into 2021. So this is a really powerful engagement with Pluto in his chart and triggering all those points once again. And so here we have, as we go forward, that's the establishment of FTX. Oh, by the way, yes, of course, and here's Neptune exactly conjunct the sun and exactly sextiling, or what, within a degree, let's say, conjuncting and sextiling his natal Neptune as well. So is it honest? No, I'd have to say absolutely not. This was definitely, with this kind of aspect, Saturn, Neptune, not great. It can clarify your ideals, it can clarify your dreams, etc., but it'll show up where things are not working. This is a strong Saturn. This is Saturn where it rules Neptune. It's in Capricorn, so Saturn rules all of this, and it's like, is this going to fly? So Neptune over here on the Sun says, yeah, whatever, it'll be great, and not really. And apparently that's how he ran things. It was like, yeah, whatever, it's all fine. Maybe another case of a deeply entitled person who is simply abusing his entitlement. So already going through 2019, at the same time that this was set up, we have Chiron, his wound around communication, being triggered by trine to Chiron and by conjunction to his natal Mercury. So that again is some kind of issue around money. Chiron going through the second house is going to be very much to do with money and issues around finances and money and investments, of course. And that Chiron plays a really strong role in 2019, 2020, and 2021 as it's lingering around his moon, which is again his emotional nature, his mind. So communications and mind in one, being hit by Chiron, which is really about childhood insecurity. It's also, I like to call Chiron where we see self-sabotage. So here we're really in, of course, in retrospect, we're seeing the self-sabotage kind of in real time. We keep going forward in time, and we see that Chiron keeps moving back over that same point to the point where he probably was quite emotionally bothered by this. Now, I know that there's been a lot of drugs. By the way, Neptune aspecting the sun, you can also wonder about drug use. Neptune and Uranus was one aspect that culturally shifted the attitude to drugs. We know that the pressure to render drugs illegal was a political one. It has had enormous implications for the weaker members of society and people who are not rich and white. But the rich white kids get to use drugs with impunity and even tweet about them, and still nobody considers that a problem, including investors apparently, because they were openly talking about their drug use, and investors didn't seem to think that was a red flag, probably because everyone on Wall Street also does coke and whatever. I mean, it's a big mess, isn't it? So this story has everything. It has drugs, it has sex, it has fraud, it has embezzlement, it has, at the highest level, political compromise, donations to the Democratic Party, even apparently hidden donations to the Republican Party, which Sam said he had to do in a hidden way because he was playing both sides, but he didn't want the Democratic people to know because they would consider that to be bad. So again, image was uppermost in his mind, and just again to reiterate that he knew what he was doing and that he's a manipulator rather than just some naive kid off the street. So we're coming back now to this point where now Saturn is moving into his 12th house. Now is going to begin the Saturn return. And that Saturn entered the 12th house in December 2021 with Jupiter conjunct. And then the actual return started happening in the spring of 2021. So the first hit, because when you get a Saturn return, you get it several times because Saturn goes back and forth. Most people get it several times over several months. It's kind of a process of 2 years rather than a one-hit wonder, which is what makes it so transformational. So here we have all of this energy of Saturn going back and forth over his natal Mars, over his natal Saturn. It hits again in January of this year. And already by 2021, there were lots of indications that things were going wrong. Now in 2022, it's really going wrong. And he's starting to send more and more internal messages about whether he should wrap up Alameda. And that would have been after this second pass of Saturn. So we're now getting Saturn over Venus. Has hit his Venus since the beginning of spring of 2022. And it basically goes back to almost conjunct the natal Venus. Saturn is almost exactly conjunct natal Venus on the day that the company declared bankruptcy. So they declared bankruptcy in two phases, the 11th of November and the 14th of November. I think that's because his companies, many companies are international, and then there's also an American one. So Saturn exactly on his natal Venus. So I just wanted to show you how these transits really speak so loudly. It's very significant when something is really jumping out of the chart. You really want to start to go backwards and see what is this person made of? What is really going on here? The other feature of the chart is that all through that phase, we also would have had Jupiter. If I go back a year, Jupiter was going through that same area of the chart. So a year ago, Jupiter was exacerbating all of that, was exaggerating all of that. I will continue now to see Jupiter going through the first house. When Jupiter goes through the first house, especially for someone who's not seeing clearly, remember we have Neptune messing up in sextile with Neptune and in a trine with Pluto, and going back and forth over the sun. We see somebody who is overconfident, so that can have a person, he actually recognized things were going wrong and chose not to do anything about it. This is Jupiter in opposition, so that would have been from the very beginning of 2022. We also, at the same time, through the whole winter of 2021 and 2022, we have Chiron conjunct the moon. So again, because Chiron goes back and forth over that point, it does come back and speak to that again through 2022. I'm jumping through this really quickly. I didn't want to make this a long video, but just to say, now we're coming back to this moment. Well, I'll just come right up to current transits, and we're seeing, and as I'm making this video, so the 13th of December, if I go back a day, on the 13th of December, he was charged and is going to be extradited to the United States. Bahamas was originally going to take care of the case. Now they've somehow been persuaded, one can only imagine behind the scenes, persuaded not to do anything. So here we have this Saturn exactly on his natal Venus at the moment that he is charged. And we see how dodgy that natal Venus has been in this recent experience. And we see that Saturn is saying, yeah, that doesn't work anymore. It's a very strong Saturn in Aquarius, very powerful, and it is semi-sextile the modern ruler of Aquarius, which is Uranus. Sudden changes, sudden impact in this 12th house. So what else to say? This is going to be a very interesting few years. I think this is going to go back and forth. I also want to say 12th house is the house of death, secrets, disappearances, and so on. There's a lot of talk about how this case seems to line up politically with the US government and how much corruption there is, particularly amongst the certain members of the Democratic Party, and because of his parents' heavy involvement in the Democratic Party, and because of the heavy funding that he's done with money that he stole from his clients, funding the political party. There's a number of people who are wondering, is this a setup? Is this something that is setting up cryptocurrencies for regulation? Was that the intent all the way through? And I think time will tell. But one of the things that has come to mind, and that would be worth keeping in mind as you see what's going on in the news, is that people are wondering, will he be Jeffrey Epstein, is what some people are saying, meaning that he will suddenly have guards falling asleep and cameras not working and all of a sudden die in his cell. One of the things that we do see with this very strong connection to Pluto again being power, proximity to power, and we see that that's what he wants, and it's part of the things that keep getting triggered in his chart. Ninth house is also government. It's all about politics. This is the ninth house, 11th house is all about politics, politicians, and so on. And so it would not surprise me at all with Saturn in a square to Pluto that something quite devious is going on. I haven't got a clue what that would be, but it certainly backs up some of the things that are being spoken about by people who know what way better than me what's going on. So watch this space. I do hope he stays well. I think once Pluto moves into his 12th house, at the very least, he's going to have the prison term that he said he would never be subjected to, but I suspect that that will certainly be the outcome as his charges run in the hundreds of years. And it would be very odd that he gets away. Pluto will be opposing his natal Chiron in 2025. 2024, 25. So that might be the moment, if he stays alive that long, might be the moment that he comes to terms with some of his own wounding and his own patterns of communication and finance and so on. Of course, Saturn going through the first house, that's hard knocks, hard changes if you have not been a good boy. So let's just leave it at that. I just wanted to jump in and show you, for people who enjoy learning about astrology, this has just been a little glimpse at what could be the situation for Sam Bankman Fried based on his natal chart, for which we don't have a time, and it's a solar chart. So thanks for listening if you've come this far, and I'll see you again in the next video.